All right. Well, welcome everybody. As we wait for this to tee up on YouTube and LinkedIn, we'll go through a couple of quick introductions. Talk to you today about your NetSuite audit. It's failing before it even starts. I am Louis Balla, CRO of Nuage, joined with Lou Balla, President and CEO of Nuage. So before I jump in, we'll give one more minute for folks to start coming in. And there we go. We are now live on LinkedIn, which is great. I will start sharing. You guys should be all set. All right. So here we go. Well, welcome everyone tuning in today's LinkedIn Live. As noted, I'm Louis Balla, CRO at Nuage. I'm joined by our president, Lou Balla, father, son, family organization. We're a NetSuite partner. We do this every day with finance teams across all kinds of industries. As a NetSuite partner, we have been working in the ecosystem for almost 15 years at this point. We've done over 350 implementations of all shapes and sizes. And today's topic came directly from conversations we've been having with finance leaders, controllers, CFOs, VPs of finance who are either on NetSuite or either just survived an audit or are bracing for one. Timely in that we have an inner circle once a quarter and just spend time with controllers, CFOs who we work with to help garner some results, some top of mind elements that they're thinking about. The title of this session is intentionally provocative. So your NetSuite audit is failing before it even starts. And for a lot of organizations, that's generally true, not because the system is wrong, but because of how access, permissions, and controls are configured inside of it. So we're going to give you the framework today for understanding what auditors actually are looking for when they look at your NetSuite environment and what you can do about it. As noted, as you would expect, please drop your questions in the comments as we go, and we'll try to address them in real time or at the very least at the very end. But let's go ahead and dive in. So,
all
Lou,
right, sorry.
Go ahead, please.
All right, let me try again. Hi, everyone. Lou Balla, CEO of Nuage. Before we get into the content, I thought it'd be good to be kind of direct about who this session is for. So if you're a CFO or VP of finance on NetSuite, this affects how you show up to your board, your auditors. Segregation of duty deficiencies get listed in management letters. So they go to the audit committee, they follow your organization through the process. If you're a controller, then you're the person who sits across the table from the auditor. When they ask to see your role assignments, access controls, that conversation either goes well, goes smoothly, or it doesn't. And if you're in IT or operations and you own user setup in NetSuite, then your decisions about who gets which role have direct financial audit implications that may not have been communicated to you clearly. So wherever you sit, stick with us. What we're covering today is directly applicable to your next audit.
Thanks, Lou. And by way of introduction, do you mind spending a couple of seconds just telling us about who you are and Nuage at a very high level?
Sure. Sorry for missing that point, but as I mentioned, Lou Balla, CEO of Nuage. I founded Nuage back in 2011. We've been focused exclusively since then on selling, implementing, and then over the last couple of years, because we really saw deficiencies out there with NetSuite customers where they were maybe only using about 20% of NetSuite's capabilities. We've got a big managed services practice where we're helping customers kind of optimize NetSuite to get from 20% to 80% or more so they can really take advantage of software they're already paying for and that they own.
Great. Well, I appreciate you joining us today, and let's dive into the audit reality. So I want to talk about setting the stakes here, and the SOD findings are, of course, number one. From an audit finding we see across mid-market ERP environments, specifically NetSuite, consistently year after year. So I think taking note that this is not a data issue, not a closing timing issue. We find that it's typically an access and permissions issue. So 2/3 of finance leaders we interact with say they were surprised by at least one access-related audit finding, not because they were careless, but because this stuff tends to drift. People change roles, workarounds get built. Nobody schedules the time to review whether user permissions still reflect how the organization actually operates. This is so silly, but again, it's something that, again, drifts all the time. And when auditors find it during the field work, not before, your timeline in the audit stretches. So they move from sampling to exhaustive testing. What was a 2-week engagement becomes 6 weeks. The message I want you to take away from this slide is NetSuite can handle all of this. The system is capable of supporting strong SOD controls out of the box. What we're here to talk about today is how to make sure you're actually using those capabilities.
So following that theme, let me make sure we're all working from the same definition. So SOD, segregation of duties, means no single person can control an entire financial process end to end. So, in the context of NetSuite, the 4 key control points are initiate, approve, record, reconcile. So, the auditor's test is pretty simple. I mean, they pull your NetSuite role assignments and they look for any user who has permission to do all 4. That's a violation. Doesn't mean that fraud has occurred, but because the control environment doesn't prevent it, it's a problem. So here's what makes this tricky in practice. Smaller finance teams, I mean, we've seen this a lot. They often have 1 or 2 people handling multiple steps. So it might be a controller, posts journal entries, and also does the bank rec, or an AP clerk who creates and approves their own vendor bills. These situations, they happen. I mean, especially in smaller teams. And as teams grow and people take on more responsibility, it happens even more. So, these create audit exposure that just compounds over time. So, the good news is that NetSuite has tools to build workflows and enforce these separations. So, the question we'll address today is whether they're actually being used.
Good question indeed. So I do want to walk you through the 5 patterns we consistently see when SOD breaks down in the NetSuite environment. These aren't theoretical. These are actually things we found during our assessments. Number 1, the over-permissioned users. So as Lou alluded to, people accumulate access over time. Every new responsibility gets a new role added, but old roles rarely get removed. When we audit an environment, we find the controller still has the AP clerk role from when they were the AP clerk 5 years ago. Oftentimes, the path of least resistance is typically how NetSuite is set up, meaning that as we have individuals who may need access to X, Y, and Z, sometimes it's easier to just give them full access. Well, as your organization grows, we need to step back and really focus on segregating these roles, permissions, and duties. Number 2, the copied roles. When you're onboarding someone quickly, copying an existing user's role is the path of least resistance, as I just shared, but you're copying whatever control violations existed in that original role too. And this is how those SOD gaps replicate across an organization. Number 3, and this one typically surprises the clients we work with, the terminated employees with active logins. I would encourage all of you to take a look at your user base, and I would not be too surprised if you actually find some folks who have been terminated who still have the active user login. We find this in nearly every environment we assess. Someone leaves, IT is notified, HR updates their file, but nobody actually updates NetSuite, because oftentimes NetSuite usually is managed by either a NetSuite system admin, an outsourced group, and or the finance controller, CFO. And auditors look at this first. Number 4, admins doing the transactions. If your NetSuite administrator is also the person posting journal entries, you have no credible audit trail. So an admin can change their own access, post the entry, and change it back, and auditors know this. Lastly, number 5, no review cadence. There's usually no process, no calendar event, no ownership of let's look at who has access to what. In 3 years of organizational change, as an example, nobody cleaning up this role structure just creates a hornet's nest.
All right. Let me give you a look inside what typically auditors are actually doing when they land in your environment. And we've kind of seen this with a lot of our clients is, on the left is typical first day provided by client request. The list of things they'll ask for within the first 48 hours. And every item on this list is something you should be able to produce same day if the controls are working. So on the right is what they're actually testing with each request. And this is important. They're not just collecting documents, they're pattern matching against known SOD violations. So when they ask for your user access report, they're running against, any segregation of duty conflict matrix. They're looking for role combinations that allow one person to do too much. What we talked about earlier. When they ask for journal entry approvals, they're checking whether approvals are happening in the system or in someone's email inbox. And the pro tip at the bottom is something we say to clients constantly. If you can't pull this list together in a day, that's the finding, not the underlying data. The fact, the issue here is the fact that you didn't have it ready. So, that tells auditors something about your processes, your maturity of your environment.
And when we talk about NetSuite controls that actually work, this is the section I want everyone to screenshot. These 4 capabilities exist in NetSuite right now. They're not add-ons. They're not partner tools. They're native to the platform. The majority of NetSuite environments we assess are either partially using this or completely underutilizing at least 3 of them. First is the role-based access control. This is your foundation. NetSuite ships with a role library that maps to typical finance functions. The key is assigning roles by function, not by person, and never letting operational users have admin access. Next, your approval workflows. This is probably the highest value SOD control NetSuite has. You can build a workflow that requires a second set of eyes on every transaction above a threshold before it ever hits the GL. I think most people tend to use this. It can get a little messy at times. But again, we see a lot of clients who have this set up for POs, but not for manual journal entries. That's exactly where auditors look. Third is your audit trail and system notes. Every change in NetSuite is logged, every single one. And this is your evidentiary foundation in any audit. The question is whether you've built the saved searches to surface that data when an auditor asks for it, or whether you're scrambling to pull records from scratch. I think ultimately the goal is everybody needs to get out of Excel and leverage NetSuite as the one version of truth. And lastly, the saved searches for control monitoring. This is a proactive play. Build the searches that flag transactions without approvals, backdated entries, and role changes. Run them before every close. By the time your auditor asks for this data, you've been reviewing it monthly.
So I really like this before and after slide. And, on the left is what we typically find when we first assess a NetSuite environment that has not had a controls review. And then on the right is what that same environment looks like after the work is done. The great news, and Louis alluded to this earlier, none of these items require any technology purchase or some new implementation or major work. These are all configuration and process changes. Role updates, workflow setup, recurring calendar events for access review, all easy things to for customers to take on and put in place.
Mm-hmm.
The gap between the left side and the right side is almost always just time and intentionality. It's not a capability issue. NetSuite supports everything on the right side in your current subscription. So, really at the end of the day, the question is whether someone actually sat down and made these changes deliberately. That's a conversation we have with clients regularly. It's a conversation we'd encourage you to have with whoever manages your NetSuite environment today.
Great point. Yeah. And as we talk through kind of the 90-day audit readiness roadmap, if you're watching this and thinking, where do I even start? Try to make this a little bit easier for you. So as we look at month one, it's about the assessment and the cleanup before you build anything. You need to know what you have. So pull the access report, find the gaps, document, especially if you're running anything from inventory to Nuage RevRec, whatever it may be. This phase produces a clear picture of your SOD exposure. Month two is about building the controls, redesign your roles, build your workflows, separate admin from operations. This is where the actual work happens, but none of these take weeks. A role redesign for a team of 10 is a focused afternoon of configuration work. Month three is about documentation and testing. Write down your procedures, run a mock audit where you actually try to pull the reports your auditors will request. See if you can answer their questions in real time, fix what breaks. By the end of the 90 days, you'll have documented, tested, operated the controlled environment, and the audit becomes a validation of what you already know, not a discovery exercise. Ultimately, the goal in all of this is to speed up your audit, make it a little bit of a repeatable, comfortable process. Audits are never very comfortable, but again, get the wheels turning so that this becomes somewhat second nature to the organization. Because I do believe once this is set up, there's only fine tweaks, testing, validation as the new releases of NetSuite come into play twice a year. But again, you got to do the legwork to make this happen. So let's talk about what this looks like in practice.
Yeah. So let me kind of bring this to make it real for you all. So this is based on patterns we see. It's not a single client, but it's a scenario. So we thought we'd kind of give a good example. So in this example, we've got a 75-person manufacturing company. They've been on NetSuite for 4 years. They have a good controller. They have clean books. Never had a significant audit finding, but now they have a new CPA firm that came in. So it's a bigger firm, more rigorous process. So the first, during the first 48 hours, the CPA firm will probably pull a user access report. And, in that case, they may find 3 former employees, all gone over 6 months, that still have active logins. That's an immediate finding, and the problem is it casts doubt on everything downstream that they find. So, another thing that they may find, the AP manager took on extra responsibilities because, there was a turnover, staff transition, and now that AP manager can both create and approve their own vendor bills. We see this constantly. This is not unusual in organizations. Not that that person misused it or did anything wrong, and that really doesn't matter. It's just a control deficiency, and that gets identified by the audit team. And then they might find that the IT admin has been processing monthly accruals, which he took on as a favor to the controller during a busy stretch. Now the person who can change his own access, the admin, is also posting journal entries. And that's a material weakness. So when they ask for documentation of the close process, the controller knows the close process. It's all up here, but there's no, written procedure. So they can verbally explain what that process is, but no processes and procedures in place. So, the process exists. It's just not documented. So these, right here, 4 findings, all fixable, all present because no one scheduled time to look at it. So the audit went from 4 weeks to 8, 11 weeks, and that's the real cost of not being proactive on all of this.
I think that's a great example. And we do have a couple of questions that have been provided to us, and we'll address those now. A reminder to the chat, if you all have any questions, we'd love to address them in real time. Happy to open it up as we see the questions building up. Please drop them in the comments. We'll work through as many as we can. To get things going, here are 5 questions we get most often. And if any of these are top of mind, let us know in the comments. We'll address them directly. So question 1, how do I know if my roles have SOD conflicts? Lou, do you want to address this one?
Sure. All right, so SOD complex, pretty easy. I mean, the fastest way is to run a roles and permission report in NetSuite. So if you're following on this, you go to setup, go to user roles, go to manage roles, and then pull a user access report. And once you pull that report, you're looking for any user whose combined roles include create, edit, and approve and post on the same transaction type. And that combination of all of those activities that they can do in that role is your conflict. Hopefully that all makes sense.
Yeah. So the second question here is, what is the minimum viable SOD for a small team? I'll take this one on. So I think at a minimum, the person who creates a transaction should not be the person who approves it. Understanding sometimes that's just not the case depending on your company size. Even if you can't have two people, then the approver really needs to be the owner of that process. And that needs to be documented at the very least as a compensating tool. Even if a controller approving what their AP clerk initiates is better than one person doing both. The third question here, Lou, is how often should we be reviewing the access?
Yeah, for reviewing access, I mean, what we recommend is quarterly. The quarterly is the right cadence. At a minimum, you want to do it every time someone joins or leaves your finance team. So, in that quarterly review probably takes about an hour if you have your safe searches already pre-built.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And oftentimes we see this twice a year, sometimes once a year.
Yeah, I mean, it all depends on the size of the company.
Exactly. Unfortunately, most times never. But again, this is such an easy win for everybody listening in today. So I think the next couple questions, can NetSuite enforce SOD automatically? Yes, through workflow approvals and role design. The system won't allow a transaction to post without the required approval. I think most people know that. A role design prevents, of course, the single person from having permissions across the full control cycle. We often joke, you give somebody admin access, well, now they can see how much your CFO, CEO is making from a salary standpoint. Having the segregation of duties is vital. Having those role designs prevents, of course, that single person from having permissions across the full control cycle. Last question here is, what's the first thing to fix? Lou, what would you recommend?
I'd say the first one's pretty simple. I mean, just look for terminated users, and deactivate them. So, it takes 10 minutes. It's a zero risk change, and it's the first thing every auditor checks. So I'd do that today.
Great. Well, Lou, if you could tell us, your three takeaways as it relates to things that people should be doing, I think that would be great, and we can conclude today's presentation.
Yeah, so I think it's always good to have actionable things to that we can leave you with to help kind of make this not just a review or a presentation, but what can you get out of this? So here are three things we came up with that you could do this week. And don't put it off. So one, pull your user access report in NetSuite. Takes 5 minutes. Look for anyone who shouldn't be there, former employees or people with admin plus operational access. Roles. I mean, we find, unfortunately, that in a lot of cases, the roles are the same roles that you had when you first implemented NetSuite, and those need to be updated and changed. Obviously, during implementation, you're trying to go live. You do what's easiest from a role perspective and making sure everybody can do what they need to do, but those need to be refined, and that's an easy fix. So that's one. I'd say number two is look at your users and see, if you can find a transaction or transaction type where a single person can both initiate and approve. Could be journal entries, could be vendor bills, expense reports, and that one finding gives you specific bounded workflow to build. So don't try to fix everything at once, but at least, start with identifying those transaction types.
Mm-hmm.
Third one is I'd put a 30-minute meeting on your calendar with whoever manages your NetSuite user setup. Not to solve any specific problems, but just to have the conversation to align on who owns access review going forward, so that you can make sure you're proactive about taking the steps as your organization changes over time. And I think these three that I've named here probably take you less than 2 hours. And it's the difference between going into your next audit with confidence, to show your auditors that you're on top of things, versus hoping nothing pops up.
No, that's great. Well, with that, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. If you have any questions, you're looking for advisement as it relates to your audits, NetSuite optimization, we're pretty easy to find. I want to thank everybody. Thank you, Lou, for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
One thing to add, Louis, just, if you'd like a more structured assessment, we're actually offering a complimentary segregation of duty review. And I think there's a link in the comments, and, we'll come in, look at your environment, and give you a prioritized picture of kind of where your exposure is. No obligation, no sales pitch in the session. It's actually going to be a functional consultant taking a look at things and, help set you on the right path.
That's great. Thank you for that reminder. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. And we look forward to continued conversations. I hope everybody has a great weekend. Talk to you guys soon.
All right. Thank you, everyone.